The afternoon sun was shining through the tall glass windows of the restaurant, filling the place with warm light. It was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, where only the wealthy and powerful usually came to dine. The staff had been busy since morning, polishing glasses, arranging cutlery, and making sure everything looked perfect. Today felt different, though. There was a buzz of nervousness in the air, because word had spread that one of the city's richest women was coming in with her daughter. The billionaire woman, Mrs. Catherine Hayes, was well known everywhere. She had built her business empire from the ground up, and people admired her success. But at the same time, many people also feared her, because she carried herself with authority and rarely smiled in public. She was the type of woman who could walk into any room and instantly silence it with her presence. The staff knew they couldn't afford a single mistake with her, because she noticed everything. Her daughter, Emma, was the reason she was coming to the restaurant that day. Emma was in her early 20s but had lived her whole life with a physical disability. She used a wheelchair, and though her mind was bright and curious, her body didn't always cooperate with her. Eating in public was usually a difficult experience for her, and Catherine often avoided taking her to crowded places. But that afternoon, Catherine decided to bring her daughter out for a nice meal. Inside the restaurant, the staff lined up as the car pulled up to the entrance. The doorman quickly opened the car door, and Catherine stepped out gracefully, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit. Emma followed, smiling shyly as her wheelchair was carefully rolled inside. People in the restaurant looked up from their tables, some whispering, some pretending not to stare. They all recognized Catherine, but their eyes were also drawn to the young woman in the wheelchair. Among the staff was a young waiter named Daniel. He had been working at the restaurant for nearly 2 years. Daniel wasn't the type of person who attracted much attention. He was quiet, polite, and always did his job with sincerity. While many waiters treated their work as just a way to earn money, Daniel took pride in serving people. He believed that kindness mattered, no matter who the customer was. When Daniel was assigned to serve Catherine and her daughter, the other waiters gave him sympathetic looks. They knew it was a big responsibility and that Catherine would notice the smallest mistake. But Daniel didn't feel fear. Instead, he straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and reminded himself that at the end of the day, they were people like everyone else. They deserved respect and care. Catherine and Emma were seated at a quiet corner table, away from the noise of the main dining area. Daniel approached them with a gentle smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am." "Good afternoon, Miss Welcome. My name is Daniel, and I'll be serving you today. May I offer you some water to start?" His voice was calm, his tone sincere. Emma looked up at him and returned the smile, though a little shyly. Catherine gave a small nod, and Daniel poured their water. He then handed them menus and patiently waited, giving them space. He noticed how Catherine glanced at her daughter with concern, as if worried that Emma might feel uncomfortable. When the time came to order, Emma's hands trembled slightly as she tried to hold the menu. Without saying anything, Daniel quietly bent down and held the menu at a comfortable angle for her. "Take your time," he said softly. "There's no rush." Emma's eyes brightened at his gesture, and Catherine, who was watching closely, raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. Emma chose a pasta dish, and Catherine ordered a salad. Daniel went to the kitchen and placed the order. While waiting, he kept checking on their table, but not in an intrusive way. He could see Emma trying to keep her spirits up, and he also noticed how protective Catherine was, always watching her daughter carefully. When the food arrived, Daniel set the dishes in front of them with care. But soon, he noticed Emma struggling to lift her fork. Her hand shook, and a small piece of pasta slipped off the fork and onto the table. She tried again, but the same thing happened. A faint shadow crossed her face, a mixture of frustration and sadness. Daniel's heart ached at the sight. He glanced at Catherine, expecting her to step in, but Catherine remained still, her eyes fixed on her daughter. It wasn't coldness, it was something else, something harder to explain. Without hesitation, Daniel knelt beside Emma. He picked up the fork gently and looked at her. "Would it be all right if I help you?" he asked softly. Emma's face lit up with surprise, and then she nodded. He began to feed her, not in a rushed way, but with patience and care. He made sure to give her time to chew, and he spoke to her as if they were simply two friends sharing a meal. "This pasta is really good, isn't it?" he said with a light chuckle. Emma laughed, a sound so pure and joyful that it made the entire corner of the restaurant seem brighter. For the first time that day, Catherine's stern face softened. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving her daughter. She had taken Emma to many public places before, but very few people had ever treated her daughter with such warmth. Most either stared with pity or avoided eye contact altogether. But this young waiter, he treated her like any other person, with dignity and kindness. Emma ate happily, enjoying not just the food but also the experience of being seen, truly seen. Other diners noticed the scene too. Some smiled, touched by the sight of the waiter helping the young woman. The restaurant, usually filled with polite conversations and business meetings, suddenly felt like a place of genuine connection. Catherine remained silent throughout, her expression unreadable. But deep inside, something stirred. She was used to people trying to impress her for her money or status. Very few people showed pure kindness without expecting something in return. Watching Daniel feed her daughter with such respect left her with a feeling she couldn't shake off. When the meal ended, Emma leaned back in her wheelchair, her face glowing with happiness. "Thank you," she whispered to Daniel. Her words were simple, but the way she said them carried more meaning than he could have imagined. Daniel smiled warmly. "It was my pleasure, miss." As Catherine prepared to leave, she glanced at Daniel for a long moment. Their eyes met, and though she didn't say anything, Daniel felt as though she had seen something in him she hadn't expected. Something that went beyond his uniform, beyond his role as a waiter. The moment passed quickly, but it would stay with both of them for a very long time. The drive back home that evening was unusually quiet. Catherine sat in the back seat of her car with her daughter beside her. Emma was still smiling, replaying the small, happy moments of their lunch. She kept talking about the pasta, the warm sunlight in the restaurant, and especially about the young waiter, Daniel, who had helped her eat without making her feel embarrassed. "Mom," Emma said softly, her eyes shining, "he was so kind. He didn't treat me differently." Catherine looked at her daughter. For years, she had taken Emma to different doctors, schools, and events. She had hired the best caregivers and therapists money could buy. But no one, not even the professionals she paid so highly, had managed to bring that same glow to Emma's face in such a simple way. "That's true," Catherine replied quietly. She didn't want to show too much emotion in front of her daughter, but inside she felt something stir. She had seen thousands of people in her life, business partners, politicians, investors, and staff. Most of them wore masks, always trying to impress her or get something from her. Very rarely did she come across genuine kindness with no strings attached. That night, long after Emma had gone to bed, Catherine sat in her private study. The room was filled with large shelves of books, framed photographs of her achievements, and awards that reminded her of her journey to success. She looked at one photograph on her desk, a picture of Emma as a little girl, laughing in a garden. It reminded her of the laughter she had heard at the restaurant earlier that day. It was the same pure, unguarded joy. She leaned back in her chair, replaying every moment in her mind. She remembered how Daniel had bent down, asked permission before helping, and how carefully he treated her daughter with dignity. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't act as though it was a grand favor. He simply cared. For a woman like Catherine, used to deals and contracts, used to weighing every decision with logic. This moment was unusual. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about humanity. The next morning, when Catherine went to Emma's room, she found her daughter already awake, reading a book. Emma looked up with the same bright expression she had carried since yesterday. "Mom, can we go there again?" she asked. Catherine paused. Her daughter rarely requested to visit the same place twice, especially restaurants. Usually, Emma found such outings tiring or uncomfortable because of the way people stared. But now, she was asking with such eagerness that Catherine couldn't ignore it. "Yes, we can," Catherine answered with a faint smile. "Maybe not today, but soon." Over the next week, Emma mentioned Daniel several times. She spoke about how he didn't hesitate, how natural he had made everything feel. Each time, Catherine listened silently, but the thought grew stronger in her heart: this young man was different. Meanwhile, Daniel had returned to his routine at the restaurant. For him, that day had been special too. He had served many customers before, but helping Emma had touched him in a way he couldn't fully explain. He didn't see her as a wealthy woman's daughter or as a customer. He saw her as a young woman who simply wanted to enjoy her meal like everyone else. At night, when Daniel went home to his small apartment, he thought about the smile on Emma's face. It reminded him of his own mother, who was unwell and often depended on him for help. He had grown up taking care of her, and perhaps that was why helping others felt natural to him. Days passed, and one afternoon, Catherine returned to the restaurant with Emma. The staff was once again nervous, but Daniel, upon seeing them, felt an unexpected warmth. He greeted them with the same calm smile. Emma beamed when she saw him. "Hello again," she said cheerfully. "Hello, miss," Daniel replied kindly. "It's very nice to see you again. Would you like to sit in the same place as last time?" Emma nodded, and Catherine watched closely as Daniel guided them to the corner table. This time, she observed more carefully, almost like a silent test. Would his kindness remain the same, or was it just a one-time act? Throughout the meal, Daniel's behavior never changed. He remained patient, thoughtful, and respectful. When Emma struggled again, he helped without hesitation, always asking first, always making sure she felt comfortable. And once again, laughter filled the table. Catherine found herself smiling, though she tried to hide it. For years, she had built walls around herself, becoming known as a tough businesswoman. But in that moment, she was simply a mother, watching her daughter enjoy a happiness money could never buy. After the meal, as they prepared to leave, Catherine asked Daniel a simple question. "What's your name?" Daniel stood straight, a little surprised. "My name is Daniel, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Daniel. For today. And for the last time as well." Daniel gave a modest smile. "It's my duty, ma'am. I'm glad I could help." But Catherine could tell it wasn't just duty. There was sincerity in his eyes, a sincerity she had rarely seen in her world of wealth and power. On the drive home, Emma couldn't stop talking. She described the meal, the jokes, and even the way Daniel remembered their favorite spot. "Mom, isn't he amazing? He didn't act like I was different. He just understood." Catherine didn't answer right away. She stared out the car window, deep in thought. Inside her, a decision was slowly forming. She wanted to know more about this young man. She wanted to understand what kind of life had shaped him into someone so genuine. That night, she asked her assistant to gather a little information about the restaurant staff, without revealing too much. All she wanted was a glimpse into who Daniel really was. When the report came, Catherine learned that Daniel came from a modest background. His father had passed away years ago, and his mother was unwell. He had given up higher education to work full-time and support her. Despite the hardships, he had never complained or sought shortcuts. He simply worked hard every day, doing his best. Catherine read the details carefully, her heart growing heavier with each line. This young man, who had so little, still had the capacity to give so much. She thought of the many people around her, wealthy and privileged, who often complained about small inconveniences. And then she thought of Daniel, who carried burdens quietly yet still found the strength to bring joy to others. The next time Catherine looked at her daughter, she knew what she had to do. Emma's life had already been changed by Daniel's kindness, but perhaps it wasn't only Emma's life that needed changing. Maybe Daniel's future could be transformed too. She had watched him in silence long enough. Now, she was ready to step forward. The following week, Catherine made a decision that surprised even herself. She was not a woman who usually spent time thinking about waiters or restaurant staff. Her world was filled with meetings, investors, and plans worth millions. Yet here she was, constantly thinking about a young man in a simple black uniform who had shown more heart than many of the powerful people she knew. One morning, Catherine told her driver to take her back to the restaurant, but this time without Emma. She wanted to see Daniel in a different setting, when her daughter wasn't there. She wanted to understand if his kindness was the same when no one was watching. The restaurant was quiet that day. A few customers sat at tables, sipping coffee or having lunch meetings. Daniel was busy carrying trays and greeting customers, but his smile never faded. Catherine entered quietly, wearing a simple coat and sunglasses, trying not to draw attention to herself. She chose a table near the back where she could observe. She watched as Daniel served an elderly couple. He leaned down so he could hear them better, spoke with patience, and even adjusted a chair so the man could sit comfortably. Later, she noticed him stop to pick up a spoon a child had dropped, returning it with a kind smile. None of these things were extraordinary, but they were genuine. They came from a place of respect. After a while, Catherine called him over. "Daniel," she said, removing her sunglasses. He froze for a moment when he recognized her. "Ma'am. I didn't realize you were here. Should I bring you a menu?" "Not yet," Catherine said. Her eyes studied him carefully. "I want to ask you something." Daniel straightened, uncertain but respectful. "Of course, ma'am." "Why did you help my daughter that day?" Catherine asked plainly. Daniel blinked. "Because she needed help," he replied, almost confused by the question. "Yes, but many people look away in such situations." "You didn't. You even knelt beside her." "Why?" Daniel hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I don't think anyone should feel embarrassed for something they cannot control. When I saw her struggling, I thought about my own mother. She is sick, and I often have to help her with small things. It doesn't make her less. It just means she needs support. I guess. I just did what felt right." Catherine listened intently. His words were simple, but they carried honesty. She had asked many people similar questions in boardrooms, testing their motives. Most gave clever answers, rehearsed and polished. Daniel's answer was raw, almost childlike in its sincerity. "You remind me of something I had forgotten," Catherine said after a pause. Compassion without expecting anything back. Daniel didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. "Sit for a moment," Catherine told him, surprising him. "I want to know more about you." He hesitated, looking around as if unsure whether it was allowed. But seeing her calm expression, he sat on the edge of the chair across from her. Catherine asked about his life, and slowly, Daniel opened up. He told her about his childhood, about how his father had passed away when he was still in school, and how his mother had raised him with love despite their struggles. He spoke about leaving college dreams behind because his mother's health needed his attention. He worked long hours at the restaurant, and in the evenings, he returned home to care for her. "Do you ever feel angry?" Catherine asked, her voice softer now. "Angry that life has been unfair to you?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Sometimes it feels heavy," he admitted. "But anger doesn't solve anything. My mother always says we should be grateful for what we have. So I focus on that. I may not have much, but I have the ability to work, to help her, and maybe to make someone's day a little better. That is enough for me." Catherine's throat tightened slightly. In her world, she had seen billionaires fight over profits, people with more than enough still demanding more. And here sat a young man with so little, yet he was rich in kindness. Their conversation was interrupted when another customer called for Daniel. He excused himself politely and returned to work. Catherine sat back in her chair, deep in thought. She realized she was not only observing him anymore, she was being moved by him. That evening, when Catherine returned home, Emma immediately asked about her day. Catherine smiled faintly. "I saw your friend again." Emma's eyes widened. "Daniel? Really? Did you talk to him?" "Yes," Catherine said, sitting beside her daughter. "I wanted to understand him better." "And?" Emma asked eagerly. "And he is just as genuine as you thought," Catherine admitted. "He has been carrying burdens quietly, yet he still has the strength to bring joy to others." Emma nodded knowingly. "I told you, Mom. He's different." Over the next days, Catherine couldn't shake the thought of Daniel. She had built her empire by trusting her instincts, and her instincts told her that this young man deserved more than a life of endless shifts and unpaid dreams. But before she made any decision, she wanted to test him one more time. On their next visit to the restaurant, Catherine and Emma arrived unannounced. The staff quickly scrambled, but Daniel welcomed them warmly, just as before. The meal went smoothly, filled with laughter once again. But at the end, Catherine did something unexpected. She placed her credit card on the table, but intentionally left it where Daniel could see the large embossed name, Catherine Hayes. She wanted to see if his behavior changed when reminded of her status. But Daniel didn't flinch. He processed the payment politely and returned her card without comment. His kindness remained unchanged, steady, and natural. That night, as Catherine tucked Emma into bed, she whispered, "I think Daniel is about to have his life changed." Emma looked at her mother with wide, hopeful eyes. "What do you mean, Mom?" Catherine kissed her forehead. "You'll see." This was the test Catherine needed. Now, she was certain. Daniel's character wasn't an act, it was who he truly was. And for the first time in years, Catherine felt an unusual excitement, not for a business deal, not for an investment, but for the chance to change someone's life in the way they had unknowingly changed hers. The following week began like any other for Daniel. He woke up early in his small apartment, made tea for his mother, and checked her medicines before leaving for work. She gave him her usual smile and blessing, telling him to take care of himself. Daniel walked to the bus stop, thinking only about the long hours ahead. For him, life was routine. He never expected surprises, and he certainly didn't expect that his life was about to change. Meanwhile, Catherine was planning something very different. For days, she had been thinking about how to approach Daniel. She didn't want him to feel uncomfortable or as though her help was an act of charity. She wanted him to understand that what she was about to offer was recognition of his goodness, a reward for the rare sincerity he carried in his heart. That afternoon, Catherine and Emma visited the restaurant again. Daniel greeted them warmly, his face lighting up when Emma smiled at him. To him, they were not just wealthy customers anymore. He had grown fond of Emma's laughter and her cheerful way of speaking. The meal went as smoothly as always, but when it was almost over, Catherine surprised him. She looked up from her plate and said, "Daniel, could you join us for a moment when you're free?" Daniel blinked, slightly nervous. Of course, ma'am. I'll be there right after I finish serving the next table. When he returned, Catherine gestured for him to sit down. He hesitated, but she gave him a firm look. Please. Sit. Emma giggled. Don't worry, Daniel. She doesn't bite. Daniel laughed softly, pulling out a chair and sitting on the edge, unsure of what was coming. Catherine folded her hands on the table. I've been watching you, Daniel. Not just with my daughter, but also with other people here. You treat everyone with respect. You don't change your behavior depending on who you are serving. That is rare. Daniel lowered his eyes modestly. I just try to do my job well, ma'am. It's more than that, Catherine insisted. Kindness like yours is not part of a uniform. It's part of who you are. And I think someone like you deserves opportunities, not just long hours in a restaurant. Daniel froze, unsure of what she meant. I don't understand. Catherine leaned forward. Tell me something, Daniel. If life had been kinder, if you didn't have to give up your studies, what would you have wanted to do? Daniel hesitated. He had buried that dream long ago. But now, looking at Catherine and Emma, he spoke honestly. I wanted to study business management. My father used to say I had a head for numbers and ideas. I wanted to make something of myself. But after he passed away, my mother became my priority. So I let go of that dream. Catherine nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Then, with a calm but firm voice, she said, what if I told you that you could still have that chance? Daniel stared at her, stunned. I don't know what you mean. I mean, Catherine continued, that I am offering to support your education. I will cover your fees, your living expenses, and I will make sure your mother has the care she needs while you study. In return, all I ask is that you take this chance seriously and build the future you once dreamed of. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't find his voice. His hands trembled slightly on the table. Ma'am, this is too much. I can't accept something like this. You don't even know me. Catherine's eyes softened. I know enough. I have seen your character. And sometimes, Daniel, character matters more than anything else. Emma leaned forward, her eyes wide with excitement. Say yes, Daniel. Please. You deserve it. Daniel looked at her, then at Catherine. His heart was torn. On one hand, the offer was beyond anything he had ever imagined. On the other, his pride whispered that he shouldn't take such a gift. I don't want to feel like a burden, he said quietly. You're not a burden, Catherine replied firmly. This is not charity. Think of it as an investment. People like you make the world better. And if I have the means to give you wings, why shouldn't I? Silence hung over the table. Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes misting. For years, he had carried his struggles alone, never expecting anyone to step in. And now, a woman he had only met because of a chance encounter was offering him a new life. Finally, with a shaky voice, he said, if you truly believe I can do it, then yes. I will accept. Emma clapped her hands joyfully. Yes. This is wonderful. Catherine allowed herself a small smile. Good. Then it's settled. From today, your life begins a new chapter. Over the next few weeks, Catherine put her promise into action. She arranged for Daniel to meet with admissions officers at a respected university. She also hired a caregiver to help his mother at home, so Daniel could focus on his studies without guilt. The first time Daniel stepped into the university building, wearing a simple but neat shirt Catherine had insisted on buying for him, he felt as though he was dreaming. Students walked past him, carrying books, discussing classes. For years, He had only watched from afar as others pursued education, believing it was a world forever closed to him. And now, he was part of it. At night, when he returned home, his mother held his hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you, my son." Tears filled his eyes as he hugged her tightly. Catherine and Emma followed his journey closely. Sometimes Emma would call him, asking about his classes, teasing him when he complained about long assignments. Catherine, though still reserved, found herself quietly pleased whenever Daniel shared his progress. But the most touching moment came one evening when Daniel visited Catherine's mansion to thank her again. Standing in her grand living room, he said, "I don't know how I will ever repay you." Catherine shook her head. "You don't have to repay me, Daniel. Just promise me one thing: when the time comes, and you are in a position to help someone else, do not hesitate. Pass it forward." Daniel nodded firmly, his heart filled with determination. "I promise." Years passed like the turning pages of a book, each chapter adding something new to Daniel's life. What once felt like an impossible dream slowly became reality. With Catherine's support, he finished his degree in business management and went on to complete a master's program as well. The journey wasn't easy. There were long nights of studying, countless assignments, and moments when he doubted himself. But every time he felt tired, he remembered Emma's laughter and Catherine's words, "Character matters more than anything else." Daniel kept his promise. He studied hard, never wasting a single opportunity. Professors praised his determination, classmates admired his humility, and soon he was no longer the shy waiter from a restaurant but a confident young man ready to step into the professional world. Back at home, his mother's health improved thanks to the caregivers Catherine had arranged. Every evening when Daniel visited her after classes, she would listen proudly as he described his lessons and experiences. "I always knew you were meant for something greater," she would whisper. For her, seeing her son finally living his dream was the greatest gift. Meanwhile, Emma and Daniel's friendship blossomed. They often spoke on the phone, exchanged messages, and sometimes met for coffee or a walk in the garden at Catherine's mansion. Emma loved hearing his stories from university, and Daniel enjoyed her sense of humor and gentle wisdom. With Emma, he never felt judged. She didn't see him as the poor waiter who had once helped her. She saw him as Daniel, kind, thoughtful, and true. Catherine, too, felt a change within herself. The tough businesswoman who once lived behind walls of pride and distance began to soften. Watching her daughter laugh again, watching Daniel grow into his potential, she realized that her wealth was not just a symbol of power but also a tool to create change. She had spent years building empires, but this helping a young man's life transform felt like one of her greatest achievements. When Daniel finally graduated, it was a day none of them would forget. The auditorium was filled with students in caps and gowns, proud families cheering from the seats. Among them sat Catherine and Emma, their faces glowing with pride as they watched Daniel walk across the stage to receive his diploma. He looked out at the audience, and for a moment his eyes locked with theirs. His heart swelled with gratitude. After the ceremony, Emma insisted on a small celebration at home. The three of them sat in Catherine's garden, surrounded by flowers and the soft glow of lanterns. Daniel raised his glass of sparkling juice and said, "I would not be here without both of you. You gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer in return. I promise, I will spend my life making sure your kindness is never wasted." Catherine smiled, her eyes misty though she tried to hide it. "We didn't give you anything you didn't already deserve, Daniel. All we did was open a door. You walked through it with your own strength." Emma leaned forward with a grin. "Now you have to keep your promise. You said you'd pass it forward, remember?" Daniel laughed. "Don't worry, Emma. I won't forget." True to his word, Daniel's journey didn't end with his graduation. With Catherine's guidance, he started his own small company. At first, It was just a modest business with a few employees, but Daniel ran it with the same values he had always lived by: honesty, respect, and kindness. Slowly, his company began to grow, not only because of smart decisions but also because people trusted him. He treated his staff fairly, listened to their needs, and created a workplace where everyone felt valued. Whenever new employees joined, Daniel would share a piece of his story. He told them about his days as a waiter, about the struggles of caring for his mother, and about the unexpected kindness that had changed everything. "Never underestimate the power of compassion," he would say. "It may seem small in the moment, but it can change a life." As his company expanded, Daniel also began to give back to the community. He started scholarships for students from low-income families, remembering how he had once thought education was out of reach. He funded programs for people with disabilities, inspired by Emma's journey. And he never missed a chance to visit his mother, who watched with pride as her son became not just successful, but also a man of honor. Emma, too, blossomed during those years. Though her disability remained, her confidence grew. Daniel often invited her to his events, and she became a voice of encouragement for many young people who felt limited by their circumstances. Together, they showed the world that kindness and determination could overcome even the hardest challenges. For Catherine, the transformation was just as profound. She no longer saw her wealth as a shield separating her from the world. Instead, she used it as a bridge supporting charities, funding health programs, and creating opportunities for others. Yet among all her contributions, the story of Daniel remained closest to her heart. Whenever people asked why she trusted him, she would simply say, "Because he treated my daughter with respect when no one else did." That was enough. Years later, at a charity event hosted by Catherine, Daniel was invited as a keynote speaker. Standing before a large audience, he told his story from the small apartment where he once lived, to the restaurant where he worked, to the moment a billionaire mother and her daughter changed his life forever. The crowd listened with rapt attention, many moved to tears. "I was just an ordinary waiter," Daniel said, his voice steady but emotional. "I had no idea that a simple act of kindness would open doors I never thought possible. But that's the truth about kindness: it has a ripple effect. When you give it freely, it doesn't end with you. It spreads, it grows, and it touches lives in ways you may never imagine." As he stepped down from the stage, Emma greeted him with a proud smile, and Catherine gave him a rare hug. For her, this was the moment she had dreamed of: seeing Daniel not as someone she had helped, but as a leader in his own right, inspiring others. The story didn't end there, of course. Life continued with its challenges and triumphs. But the bond between the three of them, the billionaire mother, her daughter, and the once humble waiter, remained unbreakable. They had become a family of sorts, bound not by blood, but by love, respect, and the belief that kindness could change the world. And whenever people asked Catherine why she had chosen to help Daniel, she would answer with the same simple truth: "Because one day, in a restaurant filled with strangers, I saw a man kneel beside my daughter and treat her with the dignity she deserved. That was the moment I knew he was someone worth believing in." And so, the story came full circle. What began as a simple lunch in a restaurant became a turning point in three lives. A billionaire learned the true power of compassion, a young woman rediscovered her laughter, and a waiter became a man who would go on to change not just his own future, but the futures of countless others. It was proof that sometimes, the smallest actions, a smile, a gentle hand, a kind word, could create the biggest changes. And in the end, it wasn't wealth or power that changed lives, but the quiet strength of humanity.